States. It's Mark from the United States.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Mark from the States. How are we doing today? I am doing fantastic. I hope you are as well. Thank you so much for coming. Big Fake Couch, it's waiting for you. You guys know what to do. I appreciate all of you. We're going to kind of wrap up the D-Day specific videos. I think today there may be another one out there. I don't know. We'll see. But there's a few other videos I want to get into. But this is one of the more famous ones. Events on D-Day, or actually right before D-Day, is the when they used the gliders and Pegasus Bridge, the capture of. So it's a great story. I've heard it a few times, but I have not seen battle guides, who we're going to be watching today, do it. There's another really good one by History Chap that he just released. I'm going to watch that, but probably on my own time. I wanted to give battle guides a watch today. Please go support his channel. I really enjoy his videos. They're different from a lot of the other history recounts of certain events, and mainly military is what he does. But he does all different wars, I guess, lack of a better way of explaining it. But he does do this one raid on Pegasus, and so I'm excited to see this. So I hope you please go over and check out his channel if you don't already. Its link will be in the description to this video and to his channel, of course, like always. So please go over there and support him. It's really important. I stress the importance of supporting the content that we watch and learn from on our channel, because it's, for me, I do this to learn and have fun and hang out with all of you. For a lot of people, this is their career. They make money from this, so it's important that we go and support them. And I know this is something you all really already know, but I need to really hammer that home. So please go over there and just give it a like, because that helps. That really does help. So thank you for allowing me to say all that. And I'm sure I'll say it before the next video as well. I want to, this is kind of not a long video. It's about 26 minutes or so. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I will just in a future video here go into more detail what and where my son is going. He is leaving next week. It's already here. He leaves next, I think, a week from today. So I'm excited for him, of course. I'm a little sad because he's going to be gone for so long, but in such a faraway place. But excited for him. I really am. So I think we'll go into his itinerary. And then when he comes back, we'll get on a live stream. And that's when our next live stream will be, is after he returns. So it'll probably be at the end of June, maybe the beginning of July, whichever day that Sunday falls on. I'm not sure after he gets back, but he said he would come on and talk about what he saw and all that cool stuff. So at least he's a little camera shy sometimes, so I don't know how long he'll want to sit and talk about it, but I would love for him to get on and talk about his experiences. But we'll go into his itinerary in a little more detail probably in the next video or so. So stick around for that. In the meantime, let's watch the first airborne assault on D-Day. Pegasus Bridge, and there's another one there too, I believe. I can't remember the name of it, but it's not too far from here. So let's check it out.
Shortly after midnight on June the 6th, 1944, a young German infantryman named Helmut Rohmer paced along this bridge in the Normandy region of France. Moments later, a crash was heard just 70 yards away, followed immediately by the sound of hobnail boots echoing in the darkness, and then the crackle of machine gun fire. He wasn't to know it, but he was witnessing the opening scenes of perhaps the most famous day in military history.
Crazy.
In this video, we'll combine the latest technology, historic imagery, veteran accounts, and on-the-ground footage to explore the epic story of the assault on and defense of the iconic Pegasus Bridge.
That's
By
so
June
good.
of 1944, there was no doubt that the long-awaited Allied invasion of Western Europe was imminent. Having steadily built up forces for more than a year, the Allies were finally poised to launch Operation Overlord. Across the Channel, the thinly stretched Germans had to answer one major question. Just where would that blow land? As early as March 1942, Hitler had issued Führer Directive 40, which set out the plan for the construction of the famous Atlantic Wall, a vast series of coastal fortifications covering thousands of miles from Norway to the Spanish border. Into this project went millions of man-hours and countless valuable resources, all with the aim of throwing any Allied invasion back into the sea. Across the Channel, the Allied planners weighed up their options. The obvious choice for the invasion was a historic one, the Pas de Calais. With the shortest channel crossing of just 22 miles, thus shorter supply and communication routes, and the advantage being well-known terrain to the Allies, it was the preferred choice. And for exactly that reason, it was decided not to land there. In fact, a hugely elaborate and successful Allied deception plan, Operation Fortitude, was hatched to convince the Germans that the target was the Pas de Calais, whilst in reality, the chosen stretch of ground was some 150 miles along France's western coast, in Normandy. Let's take a moment to understand the bigger picture on the eve of D-Day. Allied command decided to launch amphibious assaults on 5 main beaches. Moving from west to east, Americans would come ashore on Utah and Omaha beaches, the British 50th Division would land on Gold, Canadian troops were responsible for the landings on Juno, and finally British troops of the 3rd Infantry Division would come ashore on Sword Beach. All told, the beaches spanned some 45 miles of Normandy coastline. These forces, landing against fortified coastal defences, were especially vulnerable, not only on the beaches themselves, but by determined counterattacks from mobile reserve units held inland. Enter the airborne. The idea was relatively simple. In order to protect the troops landing on the coast, a screen of airborne troops would be dropped on the flanks of the invasion. The US 82nd and 101st Divisions to the west, and the British 6th Airborne to the east. Their job was to seize and hold vital bridges and road junctions all throughout the region, and to hold on to them at all costs, thus allowing the troops on the beaches to establish that famous foothold in Fortress Europe. At the very top of the list of targets of importance were 2 bridges on the eastern flank of the invasion, near to Sword Beach. Even a quick glance today tells us why they were such high priority targets. Running north-south along the...
I had no idea they were so close together. If the one on my right, I guess it would still be your right as well. I don't know, maybe it'd be your left. I got a mouse. This is Pegasus because I remember this contraption style of the bridge. Is he talking about this one over here as well as the second one? I didn't know that they were so close. Interesting.
Eastern flank of the Allied invasion were 2 excellent natural defensive barriers, namely the Orne River and Caen Canal, each being crossed by a bridge near to the village of Bénouville. In short, holding these bridges meant securing the vital connection between the amphibious landing forces and the men of the 6th Airborne protecting them. Allied intelligence had identified before the landings that the Germans did have some capable units in the area. Foremost amongst them were tanks of the 21st Panzer Division. Situated close to the city of Caen, their most direct routes towards the eastern landing beaches was across these bridges. It was the fear of an armoured assault into the vulnerable flank of the Allied invasion with potentially devastating results, which led to the decision to capture and hold them in the very first on-the-ground action of D-Day. Let's explore the area in a little more detail. Today, those 2 bridges, the Orne River or Ronville Bridge and the Caen Canal or Bénouville Bridge, are well known by the names of Horsa and Pegasus, and that's how we'll describe them here. So let's start with easternmost, Horsa. Spanning the Orne River some 3 miles inland, it was an unusual swing bridge, pivoting in the centre, allowing shipping to pass. In 1944, it was defended by a sandbagged MG-34 position on its western end and firing positions on its east. Some 600 yards along the same road, to the west, was Pegasus Bridge. Crossing the canal leading to the city of Caen, it was easily identifiable by its bascule lifting design. The actual bridge was slightly smaller than the newer one which we see here today, but in the same place and a very similar design. We see here that on the eastern side of the road we have a set of trenches, supported by firing positions and a 50mm anti-tank gun with line of sight up and down the river and main approach roads. These were protected by thick coils of barbed wire and also included on the north side of the road a concrete pillbox with firing slits, believed to house command cables for explosives rigged to blow the bridge. On the far western side of the bridge was likely a further sandbag defensive position. The defenders of these bridges, a total of 18 men, came from the 4th Company, 1st Battalion, Grenadier Regiment 736. They were part of the 716th Infantry Division, a static coastal unit within the German order of battle. Some men in the division had previously been wounded in action, and others were teenage conscripts with no battle experience. That being said, they were still certainly capable of fighting, well armed, and knew the area well. Just next to the western end of Pegasus Bridge was this building, the Café Gondry. It was frequented by the local German garrison, who were unaware of the cafe's links to the local resistance. In fact, the local resistance leader, a Madame Villon, could be found not far away in the impressive Bénouville Chateau, which in 1944 was a maternity hospital. It was information provided by civilians on the ground all across Normandy, which would provide the attacking troops with vital intelligence in the lead up to D-Day. So who were those chosen to lead the vanguard of the Allied landings?
So close.
They were these guys, the men of B and D companies, 2nd Battalion, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry, mercifully known as the Ox and Bucks, or OBLI. They were by 1944 specialist glider-borne troops within the 6th Air Landing Brigade, which itself was a component of the British 6th Airborne Division. Simply, their job was to be towed into action in wooden airspeed Horsa gliders by powered aircraft, being released several miles from their target to glide silently to Earth.
Can we all agree this is just nuts? We're going to glide in basically just like plywood gliders, and with really no way to control these things or to stop them once they hit the ground. Absolutely, to get into one of those things must have just been scary as heck. And the bravery that these dudes shown that day was amazing. Just stories like this of hey, let's get in essentially a fake airplane. We'll tow it. Doesn't have an engine. Doesn't have any really. Has very limited ways, I imagine, to control it. And let's hope you land in the right spot. But the whole point of it is so you don't hear them coming, but you're going to hear them when they hit the ground, I imagine. But I know a lot of people got hurt and some died landing these things. So yeah, it's nuts.
It was a very high-risk strategy, though ideal for cohesive surprise or coup de main assaults. Although they hadn't seen combat before, the men of the 2nd Ox and Bucks were a well-motivated and well-trained pre-war professional unit, and much of that high state of readiness was thanks to this man. 32-year-old Major John Howard, a former private soldier and policeman who'd been recalled to the British Army in 1939. Commissioned in 1940, he'd risen to Major by 1942 and commanded D Company 2nd OBLI on D-Day. The plan looked something like this. A total of 181 officers and men in 6 Horsa gliders would be towed across the English Channel by Halifax bombers. Then, being released from their tow, would split into 2 formations of 3, landing at 1-minute intervals as close as possible to their designated bridge. Hopefully achieving complete surprise, they would storm the bridge defences, prevent either from being blown, neutralise any German troops and then dig in around the bridges. The Ox and Bucks would then be joined by the men of the elite 7th Battalion Parachute Regiment, who, landing several miles away, were also to make their way to the two bridges and set up a perimeter from which they would hold off the inevitable German attacks until troops landing 4 miles away on Sword Beach could reach them. Amongst those to be landed in the 6 gliders were a few characters who will follow through the action. Leading Glider 1's assault party would be 28-year-old Lieutenant Herbert Den Brotheridge, a popular officer and keen sportsman. Also on Glider 1 was Corporal Wally Parr, a 22-year-old South Londoner with a keen sense of humour. Piloting their glider would be Staff Sergeant Jim Woolwork, a 24-year-old Manchester native from a proud military family. Commanding the assault party of Glider 3 was Lieutenant Richard Sandy Smith, a history graduate of Cambridge University whom he represented at both rugby and cricket. And finally, aboard Glider 6 was the highly respected Sergeant Wagger Thornton. Older than many of his comrades, he was looked up to as a quiet but highly skilled soldier. So, by 24th of May, Howard and his men were based here at RAF Tarrant Rushden. Today it's disused, though in 1944, as we see here, it was an active wartime airfield. Preparation and training went on apace, and on the 4th of June the men assembled on this airfield ready to depart, only to find out the entire invasion had been put back by 24 hours due to bad weather. This meant a return to camp and a second nerve-wracking journey on the afternoon of the 5th of June back to Tarrant Rushden. This time,
Imagine flying in one of those gliders in really bad weather. I mean, you're at the mercy of Mother Nature, I imagine. Ox and Bucks. I love that. Ox and Bucks. What a cool name.
there would be no going back. All eyes were now on the glider pilots who would take the men on to target. Each glider, with its complement of 2 pilots, 23 infantrymen and 5 Royal Engineers, was at absolute maximum takeoff weight. So much so that a man had been removed from each glider a few days earlier. Any fear, though, was dispelled at 11 p.m. on the 5th of June when all 6 Halifax bombers with their Horsa gliders in tow left the ground without incident and began their journey to Normandy. Today, it's hard to comprehend the emotions of those on board, but fortunately, we can call on the actual words of Major Howard himself, who recalled the journey many years later.
Although in the gliders during training, many of us had been sick, and nobody was worse than I was. On that night, I don't think anybody was sick. Whether it was because it was a particularly calm flight, or whether it was because we were too worried to be sick, I don't know. But I can assure you all, we were all bloody scared. And anybody, yes, who says they were not scared on an occasion like that is either a fool or a damn liar.
Right.
After a short flight of just 50 minutes, the small formation found themselves approaching the Normandy coast, just here between the coastal towns of Ouistreham and Cabourg, with the latter being particularly heavily defended by flak. But avoid it they did, and as they crossed the coast at about 6,000 feet, the pilots began to scan the ground for the twin features of the canal and river reflecting in the moonlight. Unfortunately, one crew, that of Glider 4, seemed to have misidentified the target and locked on instead to the River Dives some 8 miles away.
Oh, jeez.
They would land, and successfully, but in the wrong location, and so now only 5 gliders were heading to their targets at the bridges. Inside each cockpit, the pilots of the controls now released their towing cables and began their descent. It would be a 6-minute all-or-nothing ride with no second chances. The pilot in command, in the right-hand seat, had very limited assets at his disposal.
Oh my gosh.
An altimeter, compass, torch and stopwatch were about as technical as it got as they made their run in.
Wow.
Having trained, though, time after time on mock-ups in the UK, each pilot knew their task well, as the next few moments would show. Turning right and then right again to approach the bridge from the south, those 3 gliders heading to Pegasus now finally got a clear view of their target. At the controls in Glider 1 was the ever-cool Jim Woolwork. When Major Howard a few days earlier had informed Woolwork that wooden anti-glider landing poles nicknamed Rommel's asparagus had been seen in the landing area, his tongue-in-cheek response was that he wasn't worried, and that shaving a little off each wing might be useful in helping to slow the glider down.
Oh my goodness.
A closer look at what Woolwork and his comrades were facing gives us an idea of actually how tough this job was. Here we see the bridge with the canal running north-south to our left. Trees and other foliage cover the approach from the south, and a large pond can also be seen to the east. This meant that the pilots, landing here for the very first time at night in an overloaded glider with obstacles all around, had to thread the needle into this tiny landing
You're
space at
kidding
90
me.
miles per hour and...
There's no way. No way. It doesn't seem like enough room. And then throwing those sticks. I would have thought they'd be further away. That's right there.
come to a stop. That's without even beginning to consider the fact that the area was crawling with German soldiers. Here's Major Howard again, who describes those last few seconds.
We thumped twice like that, although Jim Warwick, when he speaks, always insists he made a correct three-point landing right in the corner of the field. He always argues that it was an absolute perfect landing.
Sure.
But these chaps here behind me know that it really was a thump and thump and thump like that.
In arguably one of the most incredible feats of flying in the Second World War, not only did Jim manage to bring Glider 1 safely to the ground less than 70 yards from the bridge, but he even managed to push the glider's nose straight through the German barbed wire, protecting its defences, making an opening through which the Ox and Bucks could launch their assault.
Wow.
Over the next 2 minutes, Gliders 2 and 3 hit the ground, each landing just a few yards further away. Several injuries were caused though when the pilots of Glider 2, realising that they were not slowing fast enough and about to end up in the pond, wrenched the controls round, avoiding the water but splitting the horse's fuselage. Several men were thrown out as the glider came to a halt. Glider 3 likewise had a rough landing close to the pond, where tragically Lance Corporal Fred Greenhow, knocked unconscious, was drowned amongst the wreckage in the marshy ground. He likely became the first Allied casualty of D-Day. The time was 18 minutes past midnight. As we see from this superimposed aerial image of the time, the landings were truly remarkable, and for the men in the gliders, their work had now begun. This photograph, taken after the landings, shows all three gliders with the bridge behind the trees in the distance. It was from this door on the rear right of the fuselage that Wally Parr would exit and head towards the bridge with his scout section, tasked with putting out of action the pillbox housing the detonation cables for the explosive charges on the bridge. Wally recalled,
We just stared at the bridge, and as Charlie and I raced up, John Howard stood up and said, "Charge!" at the top of his voice. Charlie and I had a running start, and I got up onto that bridge, and I think Charlie and I was about 15 yards in front. And as I looked up, it was in the moonlight, and I see this damn thing towering above me, and my mouth went dry. I couldn't spit sixpence. My tongue stuck to the top of my mouth.
Reaching the pillbox a few moments later, the scout section saw a group of 4 Germans outside, one of whom fired a flare into the air, bathing the area in light. A single shot from the defenders followed, answered by a volley of Sten gun fire which killed an NCO by the pillbox, causing 18-year-old Helmut Romer and 2 other men to flee into the night. Continuing on, the scouts threw 2 grenades into the pillbox aperture, with the engineers racing behind for the charges on the bridge. Fortunately, the bridge wasn't blown, as the Germans, whilst retaining the cables and wiring, had removed the charges on the bridge. This meant that Lieutenant Den Brotheridge and the following section could launch their assault across the bridge.
Wow.
Racing now for the far siding, firing continuously as they moved, the men pushed on, up and past Café Gondry. A furious fusillade from the attackers caused any remaining Germans to flee, and within moments, Pegasus Bridge was secure. The assault, though, did not come without cost. Somewhere in the melee and confusion, Den Brotheridge, who incredibly had led the way despite a fractured leg sustained in the landing, had fallen, shot through the neck. He died a short time later and is today buried in nearby Ronville Churchyard Cemetery. Next to his grave stands a plaque naming him as the first Allied soldier to be killed by enemy fire on D-Day. With the supporting troops of Gliders 2 and 3 working their way through the remaining German trenches to the east, the last German resistance was taken care of, and within just 14 minutes of Glider 1 touching down on Norman soil, the objective was secure. 600 yards away to the east at the same time, the attack on Horsa Bridge was underway. Despite having lost one of their 3 gliders, speed and surprise had their effect. Landing from north to south on target in landing zone Y, Glider 5 had stopped some way short of the objective, and so it was those in Glider 6 who pushed on alone. Moving through these fields towards the bridge, the German machine gun guarding it opened up, pouring a burst of tracer across the fields. Taking cover in a hedgerow, Wagger Thornton quickly set up his 2-inch mortar and managed to place a round directly onto the German machine gun position at the same moment that his comrades stormed the bridge in a hail of fire. Overwhelmed by the speed and ferocity of the assault, the defenders remained silent, and Horsa Bridge was also secure.
Wow.
When Major Howard received news at 0030 that Horsa 2 had been captured, he called to his wireless operator Ted Tappenden to broadcast the now famous phrase "ham and jam" across the radio, indicating the intact capture of both bridges.
Ham and
But as
jam.
Howard himself said, capturing those bridges was the easy part.
Holding them, yeah. I was just going to say, that's... Now they know you're there. And you can only fit so many guys on a glider. So you're going to have a very small force to try to hold it, for sure. Wow. Just, it's remarkable how they're able to land so close to Pegasus. All 3 of those gliders. Just remarkable.
Holding it would be the real challenge. Amid the general confusion at this time, a single German was seen emerging from behind the Café Gondry, throwing a stick grenade as he did so. The explosion wounded Lieutenant Smith in the wrist, who returned a burst from his Sten, killing the soldier. Monsieur Georges Gondry, hearing the fire directly below him, peered from this upstairs window and found himself facing a wounded and understandably excitable Lieutenant Smith. Seeing the silhouette in the window, he unleashed another burst. Unhurt, but getting the point, Monsieur Gondry retreated back to his bedroom. Despite this slightly frosty reception, the Café Gondry was to become the first house liberated in France on D-Day. Even to this day, Georges' younger daughter Arlette runs the cafe and cherishes the memory of that liberation.
Oh, that's cool.
For the troops on the ground, the job was far from over and Major Howard's men set up for defence. Over the next hour or so, small pockets of German troops were driven back by intense fire along the canal towpath and nearby buildings. The major risk, though, was, and had always been, armour. With very limited anti-tank capability, a determined assault by German tanks could have retaken the bridges in minutes. And so, considerable concern was felt when the distinctive noise of tracked vehicles was heard to the northwest of the bridge at around 1:30 a.m.
Rut-row.
It was in this area that both Wally Parr and Glider 6's Wagger Thornton found themselves on the western end of the Ox and Bucks positions. As they heard the steadily increasing sound of tracks, Lieutenant Smith, realising that his section was missing their spring-loaded Piat anti-tank weapon, ordered Wally Parr to sprint back to Glider 1 to retrieve it. Doing so, and being utterly exhausted on his return, he looked down to find that the firing trough had been bent at 90 degrees during the landing, and it was entirely useless. Just then, the leading German armour came into view. Wally himself described what happened next.
It was a god almighty smash, and then the biggest explosion or fireworks display I've seen for a long time. I thought they'd got it with grenades or one of the sticky bombs we used to use, but it turned out afterwards the message was, get another Piat. They already had one. And I didn't find out for some time afterwards that the bloke sat there with the Piat was Sergeant Wagger Thornton out of B Company, and he watched that tank until he couldn't get it any closer. And then he let go at point blank range. The thing exploded, and of the occupants, one died shortly afterwards. His legs were blown off.
Oh, gosh.
And then we crouched in this ditch watching everything shoot up in the sky. And I think by this time, the whole of Normandy knew that something was really happening.
Yep.
Thornton's destruction of that German armour, possibly a Marder self-propelled gun, had an important effect on the other Germans nearby. Perhaps not realising how little anti-tank capability the defenders had, they did not press home their attack. But it wasn't to be the last action here on D-Day. The men at the bridge were much relieved at the sight of the first reinforcement from 7 Para shortly after 3 a.m. Their additional firepower now meant that they could take the lead in the defence. Commanded by the impressively named Lieutenant Colonel Pinecoffin, he had assumed command and directed his men set up in houses overlooking key junctions to prepare for the inevitable assaults. Their wait wasn't a long one. Within a short time, 7 Para were engaged in bitter close-range fighting throughout Benneville and Le Port, losing a number of men killed and wounded in action. The most fierce fighting anywhere that day was in the area occupied by A Company 7 Para, who found themselves holding this line of houses close to Benneville Chateau. Attacked in front and flank by large numbers of German armour and infantry, determined to recapture the bridges, they were cut off and forced to fight all day against desperate odds, using small arms, gammon bombs and explosives to knock out armour at point-blank range. Eventually forced back, their line held, and crucially the bridges remained in British hands. Somewhere between 9 and 10 a.m, to considerable surprise, 2 German gunboats were spotted moving down the canal in the direction of Pegasus Bridge, apparently unaware of the presence of British troops. On either side of the canal, men held their fire until some 200 yards away from the bridge, the 20mm deck gun of the leading German vessel opened fire. They were immediately met by a withering response, in which a corporal in the Ox and Bucks fired a Piat round directly into the wheelhouse of the leading boat. Slewing to one side and crashing into the canal bank, the crew were taken prisoner whilst the second vessel disappeared at top speed back up the canal. On the other side of the bridge, Wally Parr once again found himself in the heart of the action. By mid-morning, he had occupied this German 50mm anti-tank gun on the eastern side of Pegasus Bridge. A short time later, a barge packed with German soldiers came into view along the canal from the direction of Caen. Here's Wally one more time.
The range is decreasing as it's belting towards us. Then someone shouted out about 800, 750, gotta be 725. I've adjusted it and fired the first one, and a terrific plume of water went up about 20 yards in front of the boat, as near as I can estimate, 20, 30. I was about 30 yards short. I've never seen a boat do a U-turn so quick. It turned across from right to left as I'm looking at it. By this time, the next one's up, and I hit it broadside on, just about where the railings met the woodwork, and it shuddered, literally. By this time, it had managed to turn, and before it disappeared round the bend of the Caen Canal, I managed to put 3 out of 4 shots up its backside, and it was limping up the canal with smoke pouring out of it.
I love that.
And the gang over there, including some captured Germans and one thing or another, were all cheering their heads off. They thought it was great fun. I did, as a matter of fact.
One final attempt to prevent the use of the bridge was made later in the day by the Luftwaffe this time. Diving in from north to south, the bridge defenders watched on as an aircraft released a bomb which struck the bridge superstructure before cartwheeling end over end into the canal without detonating.
Oh my gosh.
With a good helping of luck, the bridge remained intact. Throughout the morning of the 6th of June, the men of Seven Para and the Ox and Bucks had held on, fighting off repeated attacks, including from the direction of Benneville Chateau, which received significant attention from none other than Wally Parr, who wasn't aware that the building he was targeting with the 50mm shells was actually a maternity hospital.
Oh.
Eventually, the enemy fire died away, though the scars of that fight are still etched on the building to this day. Finally, after a grueling 12 hours on the ground, in this very spot, men of both units linked up with commandos of Lord Lovat's 1st Special Service Brigade who had landed that morning on Sword Beach, the moment being captured in this historic photograph. The men at Pegasus and Horsa Bridges, as their orders had stated, had indeed held until relieved. Of course, there was much fighting yet to come, and many of those to fight here wouldn't outlive the war. But for those who did, they always kept a place in their hearts for this location. Many veterans, including John Howard, would come back to Pegasus Bridge in the years and decades after the war, holding a service each 6th of June to commemorate those actions of D-Day. Over the years, the numbers dwindled, and today only a handful of veterans are left to attend. But the legacy of that day lives on. Each year at midnight, a service takes place next to Pegasus Bridge on the very spot where Glider 1 touched down. John Howard's daughter leads it, and her father's moving account of that day, recorded after the war, is played to those present. Shortly afterwards, a glass of champagne is offered, and a toast is raised to ham and jam. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, why not check out our look at the famous Operation Frankton right here. Of course, if you'd like to support us, it'll be really appreciated, and you can do so with our Patreon link below.
Please go support Battle Guides. Just a wonderful, wonderful channel, and he's really cool, and he's given me his blessing to to learn from his videos. I just love the way he does them. They're a lot of fun, and they're very educational, and I learn a lot. I knew the story. I've seen bits and pieces of this, this event, and but I had no idea they were so close together. And I didn't know about the sticks, what they called Rommel's asparagus. I didn't know those were there. I knew, and I didn't realize the gliders right there at Pegasus, were so close, landed so close on such a small little stretch of earth. I was really taken aback by how close they were. And the fact that, of course, they had a little luck with them too, but just the sheer bravery of these guys and skill to be able to hold it is just remarkable. Amazing. Someday I'll get to visit Normandy and hopefully be able to see all this stuff with my own eyes. So that would be pretty awesome. But this was a really good video. Thank you. Thank you for coming and watching with me, and hopefully you learned something as well. And can we all agree Wagger? What was it? Wagger Thornton might be one of the better names of World War II. Pretty awesome. Hope everybody's happy, healthy, and safe. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. All right. Bye-bye.
Mark from the States, Mark from the States, it's Mark. And he's from